I'm Daz, and today I want to talk about the 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. workday schedule and the history behind it. I apologize in advance if you hear any noise in the background. Most likely it's from our neighbors getting work done to their roofs. The significance of a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. workday is partially a matter of circumstance, thanks to the sun's rising and setting. These times make sense when determining a standard beginning and end to an 8-hour workday. Of course, we know that many people work different hours than this, but most people will work 8-hour shifts 5 days a week in the United States. This was not always the case, and it might be surprising to find out just what it took to demand an 8-hour day for reasonable pay, how hard the fight was, and how some people even lost their lives in the battle. During the early years of the U.S., most people worked on their own farms and were what we might consider self-employed. However, by the 1830s, this was the beginning of change. Still, workers were expected to work from sunup to sundown, 6 days a week, with a day of rest on the Sabbath. Yet, in 1833, a group of labor organizers formed the General Trade Union, GTU, in Philadelphia and made the unprecedented move to include unskilled workers in their organization. 2 years later, coal heavers went on to strike to demand a 10-hour day. As they marched to the city, others joined their cause. The GTU printed posters and organized parades, and soon 20,000 workers, including city employees, joined the strike. The general strike proved successful, and many employees received their 10-hour workdays and raised wages once their demands were met. The GTU gradually disintegrated. By the 1860s, workers were arguing for an 8-hour day. As 10 hours was still too harsh in many industries, the movement steadily grew. Things came to a head in May of 1886 when the leaders of Chicago Knights of Labor, Albert Parsons, led 80,000 workers through the streets demanding an 8-hour workday. Parsons was born in 1848 and was raised in Texas, serving for a time in the Army of Confederacy during the American Civil War. Despite this, he worked as a lawyer to defend ex-slaves' rights after the war and married Lucy Waller, a woman of mixed race origins. Their marriage caused a scandal, and they fled to Chicago and eventually joined the socialist and labor movements. Lucy Parsons would go on to be a labor leader herself. The Chicago Police Department once claimed that she was worse than 1,000 rioters. Albert Parsons' actions sparked a national movement, and an estimated 350,000 workers went on strike with the same demand, an 8-hour day. Parsons spoke at a demonstration in Haymarket Square on May 4th, 1886, partially demonstrating against the Chicago police who had killed 4 protesters the day before. A large police presence was at Haymarket that day, and someone threw a bomb toward a group of police officers and killed 8 men, including 1 police officer. A battle ensued in which many more people were killed or injured. Witnesses pointed to the man they believed threw the bomb, but he was released for unknown reasons. Parsons, suspected of being part of the plot to bomb the police, was wanted and appeared in court for his own free will. While the prosecution could provide no key evidence linking their suspects to the bomb, they used the labor leaders' words against them to say they influenced the bomber to act. All 8 suspects were found guilty, and 5 were sentenced to hang, including Albert Parsons. He was hanged on November 10th, 1887, a martyr to the cause of the 8-hour workday. May 1st, the day Parsons' first march in Chicago, became an important anniversary in the labor movement known as Mayday. Parsons and others sentenced to death galvanized the labor movement, but they would not be the last casualties of the war. In Pennsylvania in 1897, newly joined members of the United Mine Workers UMW were striking with several demands. Chief among them was the 8-hour workday. The strikers were almost all immigrants from Eastern Europe. The strike escalated with altercations between coal miners, strikebreakers, and local authorities. There were about 10,000 miners on strike, and the mine owners demanded that the sheriff of Schuylkill County begin arresting them. 300 to 400 demonstrators marched to Latimer to support a chapter of the UMW. The sheriff and 150 armed deputies accosted them. There was a scuffle, and the deputies opened fire, massacring 19 miners and wounding several others. It would become known as the Latimer Massacre, but was largely forgotten because of the rural location and because the unarmed victims were immigrants. While the UMW had largely been hesitant to include immigrants, miners, especially those of Slavic descent, before the massacre, they eventually changed their tactics. In calling for a general strike, UMW President John Mitchell stated, "The coal you dig isn't Slavic or Polish or Irish coal, it's just coal." Using that as a slogan, in 1902, UMW's strike eventually achieved an 8-hour workday for all miners. Still, few people were calling for a national requirement for an 8-hour workday. It would not become widely discussed until the presidential election of 1912 and the surprising reemergence of Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt served as president from 1901 to 1909, but decided not to run for a second full term, instead supported William Howard Taft. However, after Taft's performance in his first term, Roosevelt decided to challenge his re-election bid as a third-party candidate. He called his party the Progressive Party. Part of Roosevelt's platform in 1912 was forming a Department of Labor and establishing a national 8-hour workday. Unfortunately, Roosevelt and Taft lost to the Democrat nominee Woodrow Wilson. While Democrats favored labor reform, Wilson opposed organized labor unions and believed largely in the benefit of competition in the workplace. However, in 1912, he did, perhaps under pressure, state that he thought workers' hours should be rational. Nevertheless, Democratic platform remained vague on any hand and fast rules concerning the regulation of hours. It would take some time, but eventually the Democrats under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would complete the journey of an 8-hour workday. After the devastation of the Great Depression, it was clear that workers needed help and assurance that their desperation for a job would not be used to force them to excessive labor. FDR's Fair Deal put the Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938 through the Department of Labor. The act accomplished a great deal, including creating a division of wage and hour in the Department of Labor. The division establishes the national minimum wage. The Fair Labor Standards Act established a 40-hour work week, which we still hold today. Any time work beyond this is considered overtime and must be paid at a higher level, not less than 1.5 times normal wages. Nowhere does the Act specify an 8-hour workday or a requirement that a shift begins at 9 a.m. and ends at 5 p.m. Many people work 4 to 10-hour shifts and might work first, second, or third shifts and might work when it's sometimes referred to as a flex schedule, in which they arrive to work sometimes during an agreed period and then leave after accepted shift is complete. If they work beyond 40 hours, they should be paid overtime, but there are exceptions even to that regulation. Many jobs in the agricultural industry are not subject to all the rules specified in the Fair Labor Standard Act because they require workers to work long hours during the growing and harvesting seasons, but not necessarily during the winter months. Fishermen who are out at sea for months are exempt from the overtime rules. Also, salary jobs, which are often considered at an executive level, are not eligible for overtime under this act. It is safe to say that most people in America do not work a 9-to-5 job. Often one's lunch period must be considered. So a person starting at 9 a.m. would take a half an hour lunch, and so to fulfill a full 8-hour shift would not clock out until 5:30. The ideal of 9 to 5 being a standard workday comes from the years just after World War II, during a high in the economy when many people worked 9 to 5, with their lunch being counted as part of the workday. At that time, thanks in large part to the struggle by labor organizers in the previous century, they would enjoy an 8-hour day with plenty of leisure time. This was the time the growth of suburbia and the ubiquitous flannel suit. Factory and office work reached a standard schedule, but this did not last for long. Overtime became more common and factory workers found their pay stagnated. As foreign competition that extended the life of the Cold War dragged on, the U.S. economy suffered, and the 9 to 5 became less common. Today, hours vary greatly, as does the nature of work. As in the country's early days, the self-employed still set their own hours, but to remain competitive, these hours are often longer than 40-hour weeks. Employers adhere to government regulations where they must, but often create schedules that benefit them more than their employees. Employees for the past are reluctant to organize because companies often deal harshly with attempts of unionization. 9 to 5 no longer makes such sense in a world of remote contractual or work with changing schedules. Where unions still do exist, employees have the means to address any violations of employment agreements. Many people in America still enjoy the 8-hour workday thanks to the sacrifices of people like Albert Parsons and the promotion of progressive ideas like those of Theodore Roosevelt and his cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So that's a little background on the 9 to 5 workday. And a lot of people know too that Ford Motor Company, one of the first employers to institute an 8-hour workday. And there's talks sometimes with the way times have changed if workday should be restructured or people work 3 to 4 days instead of 5 full days. But I'd like to know your thoughts on the ideal of a 40-hour work week. Do you think it's still a good model in our modern time or going forward with tech? Do you think it's something that should be changed or altered? And what do you think about the contributions of those who fought for 8-hour days versus 10-hour work days? Let me know what you think. I hope you found this informative and you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care. God bless. Until next time.